Welcome back to 10 with Travis here on YouTube at Radical Wealth Network. This is our first real content for 10 with Travis, but I hope you were able to see the intro video. Now remember, 10 with Travis isn't necessarily 10 full minutes with Travis, or we're going 10 and beyond. It's 10 and under. So some of these videos might be 6, some might be 8, some might be right at 10, but remember, no more than 10. So I talked last video about jumping into the Word, so we're going to start with the book of Galatians. So today we're not going to get into the verses of Galatians yet, but we're going to first talk about some background. It's always good to get some idea of the times, who wrote it, maybe when it was wrote, to whom it was written to, just so you can start to get an idea when you read the verses that they come alive and you can kind of feel what the author may be speaking and why they may be speaking in that way. So the author of Galatians is Paul. He wrote vast majority of the New Testament, so he's going to be the author of a lot of things that we talk about. So it was actually written to a group of churches. So Galatians isn't necessarily one church or one area. So Galatia is a part of Asia Minor and has many different individual towns and cities located in there. So it's thought to be written around AD 50, 60 in that time frame. And it is probably Paul's strongest push about grace. So we'll be talking about grace a lot. Anyone that you listen to should really be talking about grace a lot, because that's just really who Jesus is. So Paul really hammers down grace in Galatians here. And the reason is because there was a group called the Judaizers that they were saying that, yes, grace is important, but you still need to keep the Old Testament laws and certain laws such as circumcision. So you'll hear us talk about circumcision, or hear Paul talk about that a lot in his verses, as that was just a common theme in the day. So what they were saying is, yes, grace is great, we need grace, we need faith, but for the Jews to be like, or the Gentiles to be like the Jews, they needed to be circumcised. So that's where the kind of the confusion or the misleading was coming from. So he talks about that, and then he talks about, which is a phrase that we kind of hear sometimes, is fallen from grace. So he does discuss that a little bit, which isn't necessarily, hey, I was good this day, I was bad this day, I've fallen from grace, or I'm stuck in a sin, so I've fallen from grace. But no, it's more of, if you fall from grace, that's because you're trying to be justified based off the law. So anytime you try to be justified based off the law, you've fallen from grace. So you've fallen from being justified by grace and just by putting your faith in Jesus Christ. So we also just see that the Judaizers come against Paul to try to discredit what he's saying. They call him a secondhand apostle. So they say he's not like Peter and James, people that were around Jesus, but they're saying that he's a secondhand apostle. So Paul kind of addresses that issue in his apostleship, his authority in that as well. And what they were saying is that he was trying to make the gospel sound too easy or very attractive by saying, yeah, you don't need to keep any of these Old Testament laws. All you just need is, your faith in Jesus and you're good. And, that seemed too easy for them. And they thought he was doing it to try to attract people by making it very simple and easy. But the good news is it is very easy. It's serious. You have to really put your faith in Christ, but it is as easy as that to be saved. So the book of Galatians is kind of broken down into 3 separate sections. The first one, which is like chapters 1 and 2, is biographical. So it's where he defends himself in a humble way, again, because they were attacking him, so he just had to establish, that it was not necessarily him, but God through him, and things of that nature. The second one is doctrinal, so he presents a series of masterful arguments and illustrations to prove how the law is inferior, and that how the gospel and the grace has taken over of that. And then just also talk about true purpose of the law then. So again, when they put so much emphasis on the law, he didn't just say, scratch the law, but he wanted to show what the purpose of the law actually was, and then the practical application of the doctrine. So he teaches us how to use our Christian liberty in a positive way and not in a negative way. So a negative way would be, okay, I have all this grace, I can go out and sin or do whatever I want. But it's usually the reverse, right? When we feel the love of God and we know the grace that God has for us, that is when we can attain righteousness through Him, and then that kind of gets the sin off of you. So that's what pushes it out of your body, is having that grace infilling, and then the sin pushes out. So when you kind of think of today's applications though, right, we don't go around talking about circumcision too much. That's not really a hot topic, but stuff we do talk about is how much time do you spend with God? How many times do you, maybe do something church related, whether it's a life group or going to church, things like that. So what day of the week do you go to church, or do you serve in church? So sometimes we put some emphasis on things where we look at someone and say, that person says they're a Christian, but I don't know, because they don't go to the same church I go to, or they go to church but they don't go to a life group, so they're really not all in for Christ. So we do have some of that in today's culture, and we need to be aware that we don't need to judge anybody based off of what they're doing. Yes, all those things are good, and those things will deepen your relationship with Christ and probably benefit you in this life. But in terms of judging someone on salvation or where they are with Christ, we don't want to do any of that. So in our next video, we're going to jump into Galatians chapter 1, maybe even Galatians chapter 2, depending on how much time we have. And in those two chapters, we're going to see that Paul talks about the one true gospel, and then his authority as an apostle, as we kind of talked about on there. So as always, comment below or email if you have questions or thoughts, or if you just want different thoughts or questions, whether it's related to this or not. Go ahead and shoot that over to us, and we hope to see you in the next video.